The rain had just stopped when Sadiq Adeyemi pulled his small wooden door halfway shut. Water dripped from the edge of the rusted zinc roof of his roadside mechanic yard, tapping the ground like a slow clock. The street in Lagos was already returning to life. Danfo buses shouted for passengers, motorbikes splashed through puddles, and generators coughed back into noise. The smell of wet dust mixed with engine oil hung heavy in the air. Sadiq wiped his hands on his faded blue overall and sighed. It had been a hard day. Only 2 cars had come in, and one customer had argued for nearly an hour before paying less than promised. His stomach was empty, and his legs ached from bending under engines since morning. All he wanted was to lock up, eat something small, and lie down on the thin mattress in the room behind the workshop. As he reached for the padlock, he heard it. A sound that did not belong to the street. It was soft, weak, almost swallowed by the noise of Lagos. At first, Sadiq thought it was a cat. Stray animals often hid around the stacked tires at the back of his yard. He turned away, tired and ready to go home. Then the sound came again. This time it was clearer. A low, broken cry, like someone trying not to be heard. Sadiq froze. His heart began to beat faster. Helping strangers in Lagos was not simple. People disappeared. People were accused. Police questions could ruin a life. He had learned long ago to mind his business. Still, his feet moved on their own. He walked slowly toward the back of the yard where old tires were piled in tall, uneven stacks. Rainwater slid down their black sides. The ground there was muddy and dark. Sadiq pushed one tire aside, then another. That was when he saw her. She was lying on her side, half hidden by the tires, her clothes soaked and torn. Mud streaked her arms and face. Her hair was tangled and stuck to her skin. At first, Sadiq thought she was already dead. His breath caught in his throat. Then her chest moved slightly. Very slightly. "Oh God," he whispered. The girl looked young. Too young to be lying like this behind a mechanic yard. Her lips were dry and cracked. Her eyes were half open but unfocused, as if she was looking at something far away. When she tried to speak, only a faint sound came out. "Water," she breathed. Sadiq's hands trembled. He looked around quickly. The street was busy again. People passed without looking. Lagos did not stop for anyone. He knelt beside her, careful, unsure what to do. Who was she? How did she get here? Was someone looking for her? Was she running from something dangerous? Fear crawled up his spine. Poverty already held him tightly. Trouble would finish him completely. He stood up halfway, his mind telling him to leave. Someone else would come. Someone richer. Someone stronger. But the girl's eyes moved again. They found his face. There was no accusation in them. No demand. Only fear and exhaustion. Sadiq swallowed hard. He remembered his own childhood, sleeping hungry in Port Harcourt before he came to Lagos. He remembered the days people had walked past him like he was invisible. He felt the weight of the city pressing down on him, telling him to turn away. He ignored it. Slowly, carefully, Sadiq slid his arm under the girl's shoulders. She was frighteningly light. Too light for a living person. She winced softly as he lifted her, her head falling against his chest. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. "It's okay," he whispered, though he was not sure it was true. "You're safe for now." He carried her into the workshop and laid her gently on the old chaptered wooden bench near a pillar holding up the canopy. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still dark with evening. Sadiq brought a small cup of water and pressed it to her lips. She drank slowly, each swallow a struggle. As he watched her breathe, fear and responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. All he knew was that if he had not listened to that small sound behind the tires, she would have died alone in the mud. And now, her life rested in his poor, oil-stained hands. Night settled slowly over Lagos, bringing with it the familiar heat that refused to leave even after rainfall. The mechanic yard grew quiet as the streetlights flickered on, casting weak yellow circles on the wet ground. Sadiq Adeyemi stood beside the wooden bench, watching the girl breathe. She was still alive. Barely. He had cleaned her face with an old cloth dipped in water. The mud came off in streaks, revealing pale skin stretched tight with exhaustion. Her breathing remained shallow, her chest rising and falling unevenly, as if each breath required permission from her body. Sadiq sat on an overturned bucket beside her, his elbows on his knees, his head lowered. This was madness, he told himself. He had no money, no medical knowledge, no protection. If anyone reported him, he would not even be able to explain properly. Still, when he imagined leaving her outside, alone behind the tires, his chest tightened painfully. He stood up and locked the front of the workshop from the inside. Not because it would truly protect them, but because it made him feel like he had done something. The room smelled of oil, rust, and damp wood. It was not a place for healing, but it was all he had. Sadiq went to the small room behind the workshop and returned with a plate of cold rice. It was all the food he had saved for the night. He hesitated, then placed the plate on the ground and scooped a small amount into a spoon. He knelt beside the bench again. "Please," he said softly, not sure if she could hear him. "Try." The girl's eyes fluttered. Slowly, painfully, she opened them. Her gaze moved without focus until it landed on the spoon near her lips. Her mouth opened slightly. Sadiq's hand shook as he fed her the first bite. She chewed slowly, weakly, as if her body had forgotten how to eat. It took nearly a full minute before she swallowed. Sadiq held his breath until it happened. Then he exhaled, relief washing through him like warm water. "Small," he whispered. "Just small." He fed her again. And again. Between each spoonful, he waited, watching for signs that her body was rejecting the food. Sweat formed on his forehead. He felt helpless, like he was standing between life and death with nothing but a spoon. After a while, she managed to swallow 3 small bites. Her eyes closed again, exhaustion pulling her under. Sadiq wiped his hands on his trousers and leaned back against the pillar. "Thank you," she whispered suddenly. The sound startled him. He leaned forward. "You're awake." She nodded weakly. "My name is Amina." "Amina," he repeated quietly. "I'm Sadiq." She tried to smile but failed. Her lips trembled. "I thought I would die." The words hit him harder than he expected. He looked away for a moment, blinking fast. "You didn't," he said. "Not today." He brought her water again, letting her sip carefully. Afterward, he covered her with an old clean cloth he used to wipe engines. It was thin, but it was something. That night, Sadiq did not sleep. He sat on the floor beside the bench, listening to Amina's breathing, counting each rise and fall of her chest. Every time she shifted or coughed, his heart jumped. He wondered how long she had been without food. How far she had walked. What kind of life she came from. When morning came, he bought bread instead of breakfast and soaked it in water until it was soft. He fed her again. Slowly. Carefully. With patience he did not know he possessed. By evening, Amina could sit up for a few seconds before collapsing back against the pillar. Her voice was still weak, but it was clearer now. Sadiq knew one thing for sure. He had crossed a line he could never uncross. And as long as Amina lay hidden inside his poor workshop, her life was tied to his, whether Lagos approved of it or not. Lagos did not slow down for anyone. Morning came with noise, heat, and impatience. Horns screamed. Hawkers argued. The street outside Sadiq Adeyemi's workshop filled with movement as if nothing fragile lay hidden behind the rusted metal door. People passed by laughing, shouting, bargaining, living. Inside the workshop, time moved differently. Amina lay on the wooden bench, her body curled slightly, her face pale. The little strength she had gained the day before seemed to slip away overnight. She woke coughing, a deep, painful sound that shook her thin chest. Sadiq rushed to her side, fear tightening his throat. "It's okay," he said, though he did not know if it was. He held her upright as she coughed until her breathing settled into shallow gasps. He fed her again that morning, but she could barely swallow 2 spoonfuls. Her hands shook when she tried to lift the cup of water. Sadiq helped her, watching her face closely, afraid she would choke. Outside, a neighbor's voice cut through the air. "Sadiq, are you not opening today? It was Musa, the vulcanizer from 2 shops down. Sadiq froze. His eyes went to Amina, then back to the door. In a minute, he shouted back. Footsteps approached. Someone knocked on the metal door, hard and impatient. Sadiq's heart pounded. He wiped his hands on his trousers and opened the door only a little. Musa leaned in, his eyes sharp. Why are you locking yourself inside like this? You sick? Sadiq forced a laugh. Just tired. Musa sniffed the air and frowned. Your place smells strange. Sadiq felt sweat trickle down his back. Oil, he said quickly. Rainwater entered yesterday. Musa stared for a moment longer, then shrugged. Be careful. Police passed here this morning asking questions about someone missing. The words hit Sadiq like a blow. Missing? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Musa nodded. A young woman. They said her family is looking. Big people, from what I heard. Sadiq closed the door slowly after Musa left. His legs felt weak. He leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor. His mind raced. Missing girl. Police. Big people. He looked at Amina. She was half asleep, her breathing uneven. Was she the one they were looking for? If the police came and found her here, how would he explain? He had no hospital record. No proof. Just a dying girl and a story that could sound like a lie. The pressure grew as the day went on. Another neighbor complained about the locked workshop. A woman selling food asked why he had not come to eat as usual. Every voice felt like a threat. Every knock made his heart jump. Amina's condition worsened by afternoon. She grew feverish, her skin hot to the touch. She murmured in her sleep, words that made no sense. Once, she cried softly, tears sliding down her temples. Sadiq dipped a cloth in water and wiped her face again and again. He wished for medicine. He wished for a hospital. He wished for money. But all he had was care. As night approached, sirens wailed in the distance. Sadiq's breath caught each time they grew louder, then faded. He imagined officers bursting in, accusing him, dragging him away. Lagos did not care that a poor mechanic was fighting death with bread and water. It did not care that a young woman was fading quietly inside a forgotten workshop. All Sadiq could do was sit beside Amina, hold her hand, and pray that the city would stay blind a little longer. The night settled like a heavy blanket over the Lagos streets, and the constant hum of the city outside felt distant, almost unreal, inside Sadiq Adeyemi's cramped workshop. Amina lay on the wooden bench, wrapped in the thin cloth he had found to cover her, her breath shallow but steady for now. Sadiq sat on the floor beside her, quietly watching, waiting for the moment she might speak again. Hours passed in silence. He had fed her small bites of soft bread soaked in water and given her sips of warm water to drink. Each movement was cautious, careful not to jolt her fragile body. The sweat on her forehead glimmered under the single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. She shifted slightly, opening her eyes with a sluggish effort, and Sadiq leaned closer. Amina, he said softly, can you tell me anything about where you're from? Why you were out there? Her lips moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, and her voice was little more than a whisper. I have money, a home, but, she coughed, a deep, painful sound that made her whole body tremble. Sadiq held her gently until she caught her breath. But, men, her hand weakly tried to reach Sadiq, as if to explain more than her words could. Her eyes, full of fear, scanned the dusty walls as though the danger had followed her here. Sadiq could not tell if she was talking about people she feared or imagining shadows from her weakened state. Men, he asked softly. Who hurt you? She shook her head lightly, closing her eyes. Too tired. Can't say. A tremor ran through her thin frame. Sadiq understood. She had begun to trust him enough to speak, yet her body was too fragile to carry the weight of her story. He pressed a hand over hers. It's okay. You don't have to say anything until you're ready. Just rest. That's all that matters right now. Amina's lips moved again, slower this time, almost forming a sentence, but the words fell apart. They want, her voice faltered and then vanished. She looked at Sadiq with eyes full of a quiet desperation, as if begging him to understand. He nodded, though he had no idea what she meant. "Whatever it is," he said firmly, "it stays here. No one will hurt you here." She tried a weak smile and squeezed his hand slightly before drifting into sleep again. Sadiq sat back, his mind racing. He wondered what kind of life she had lived to bring her here, abandoned, vulnerable, and alone. He imagined mansions, cars, wealth, but also danger, shadows that had chased her until she had nowhere to run. The workshop was silent except for her soft breathing. Outside, Lagos continued on, indifferent, alive with noise and light. It did not care about a poor mechanic and a dying girl tucked behind a pile of tires. But inside, Sadiq felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Her whispers of the past, though fragmented and incomplete, had shaken him. They hinted at wealth, danger, and men who could have destroyed her. And yet, she had ended up in his care, fragile, powerless, but alive. As he closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the distant horns and shouts of the city, he made a quiet promise to himself. Whatever her past, whatever dangers she had faced, he would keep her alive. He would protect her until she could stand on her own again, no matter what Lagos threw at them, no matter how impossible it seemed. The night felt longer than ever, filled with unspoken stories and shadows of danger that hovered in the corners of the room. Sadiq knew one thing clearly: Amina's past was not finished with her, and somehow, he was already caught up in it. The morning sun pierced through the gaps in the corrugated metal roof of Sadiq Adeyemi's workshop, catching dust motes that danced lazily in the light. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb Amina Bello, who lay on the worn wooden bench, pale and weak, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She had managed a few spoonfuls of rice and water the night before, but her strength was gone, leaving Sadiq with a heavy sense of helplessness. He glanced around the workshop, surveying the few tools he had left. Wrenches, pliers, a set of sockets, and a battered car jack, everything he owned to earn his daily bread. He had already fed her his own meal, small as it was, and yet it had barely made a dent in her hunger. Her fever seemed to rise as he watched, and his heart clenched with worry. Sadiq knew he had to do more. He could not rely on water and scraps of bread alone. She needed medicine, proper food, something to help her body fight the weakness threatening to consume her. He counted the small money he had left, almost nothing. His mind raced. There was only one way. With a sigh, he began gathering tools from his workbench, setting them aside. Each one carried memories of his labor, of nights spent fixing engines under harsh light or heavy rain, of the hope that maybe one day he would earn enough to have a life beyond dust and rust. But today, all that mattered was Amina. By mid-morning, he had carried the tools to a nearby second-hand shop, a manila envelope waiting for him, and he sold the items for a small sum. It was not enough to buy everything she needed, but it was a start. He clutched the money tightly, a mix of fear and determination coursing through him. He bought medicine for her fever, some rice, a few eggs, and some bread. He returned to the workshop, careful to keep the purchases from spoiling the meager space he had set aside for her. The city outside roared with life. Danfo buses screamed down the road, motorbikes weaved recklessly, street vendors shouted over the noise, and Lagos moved as if nothing fragile existed inside a dusty mechanic yard. Amina's eyes fluttered open when he returned. She tried to smile, but the effort was almost unbearable. "Sadiq," she whispered, barely audible. "You don't have to speak," he said, handing her a small bowl of warm rice. "Just eat slowly." She took a spoon, her fingers trembling, and Sadiq watched her with a mixture of hope and worry. Each bite seemed to drain more from him than it gave her, yet he kept feeding her, believing in the fragile thread of life that still clung to her. As she ate, Sadiq sank onto the floor, his back against the wall. He felt the hunger gnawing at him, but it was nothing compared to the fear and exhaustion etched into Amina's face. He thought about the city outside, the people who would never notice, the dangers that lurked in corners, the police who might misunderstand a kind act. In a city like Lagos, kindness could be dangerous. He wondered if he was foolish. Was it worth risking his life, his livelihood, for a stranger? Could his small acts of care truly change the course of her fading life? The questions pressed against him like the heat of the afternoon sun. Yet, as he watched her swallow the last few spoonfuls, her body slowly gathering strength, Sadiq felt something rise in his chest. Faith, not in religion, but in the fragile, human kind of faith that whispered, even in a city as hard as Lagos, goodness matters. Even small acts can save a life. By evening, Amina's fever had broken slightly. Her breathing steadied, and she looked at him with eyes that held trust he had never been given before. Sadiq knew the night would be long. He would sit with her, watch over her, and protect her as best he could. Outside, Lagos continued its unyielding rhythm. Horns, shouts, and engines filled the air. Yet inside that small, dusty workshop, there was a quiet rebellion, a poor mechanic refusing to give up on a dying girl, holding on to faith and the fragile hope that his small kindness could withstand a city that seemed to care for nothing. Sadiq whispered softly as he settled beside her. "We will survive this. I promise." And for the first time that day, Amina's lips curved slightly, a faint glimmer of trust in a world that had almost forgotten her. The heat of the afternoon pressed down on Sadiq Adeyemi as he worked on a rusty engine, his hands slick with oil, the sweat running down his brow. Amina lay quietly on the bench behind him, finally sleeping after a small meal, her breathing shallow but steady. The workshop smelled of grease, old metal, and the faint trace of the rice he had fed her. Outside, Lagos carried on with its usual chaos. Motorbikes darted through traffic, vendors shouted over one another, and the metallic clang of other workshops echoed down the street. Sadiq wiped his hands on a rag, leaning against the workbench for a moment to catch his breath. He had been so focused on survival, both his and Amina's, that he had barely noticed the changes in the city around him. But then came a sound that did not belong. It was distant at first, almost drowned out by the cacophony of the city. A low, deep hum that vibrated through the ground and the air, smooth and powerful in a way that no bus, motorbike, or generator could produce. Sadiq froze, wrench in hand. The sound was deliberate, heavy, rolling like an army of engines moving in unison. He glanced at Amina. Her eyes flickered open, half-focused, as if she too sensed the change in the air. The usual chaos of Lagos had taught Sadiq to be alert, to expect danger around every corner, but this was different. There was a weight to the noise, a presence he could feel in his chest, in his bones, a warning that something important, something beyond the ordinary, was arriving. The hum grew louder, closer. Sadiq set the wrench down slowly, trying not to disturb Amina. The city outside seemed to falter for a heartbeat. A hawker's call stuttered mid-shout. A Danfo bus braked sharply, the driver cursing as he tried to gauge the source of the strange, powerful noise. The air felt heavier, charged with expectation. Sadiq's mind raced. What could it be? A powerful man? A police raid? Or worse, a criminal looking for trouble? His heart pounded as he wiped his oily hands on his faded overall. He had faced danger before, had confronted robbers, storms, and accidents, but this sound carried authority, not menace. Authority that demanded attention, authority that could change everything. From the street, a dark line of vehicles appeared. Not the usual Lagos traffic, not buses or taxis, but sleek, black cars rolling together, tinted windows reflecting the midday sun. They moved in formation, smooth and deliberate, as if the city itself had cleared a path for them. Sadiq's chest tightened. The workshop suddenly felt smaller, more exposed, as though some invisible eye was examining every rusted tool, every scattered tire, and even the frail girl he had saved. He glanced at Amina. Her eyes were wide now, the small life inside the workshop sensing the arrival of something monumental. Sadiq's hand went to her shoulder, a subtle shield, even though he did not fully understand who or what was approaching. The lead car slowed as it reached the end of the street, its engine still resonating with power. Sadiq could see a man step out, tall and broad, moving with a calm that contrasted sharply with the urgency of the sound. His suit was immaculate, his shoes polished, his presence radiating control and authority. Lagos seemed to quiet itself in response to his arrival. Vendors paused mid-call, hawkers froze, and even the wind seemed to hesitate. Sadiq's heart raced faster than it had ever done before. Something about this man, about the convoy, whispered of life-changing events. Questions raced through his mind. Who are they? Why here? Will they help or destroy? And above all, what did this mean for the girl he had fought so hard to keep alive? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Whatever was coming, it had arrived with purpose. Whatever awaited inside those sleek black cars, he knew one thing: the course of their lives was about to change forever. And as the first polished shoe hit the dusty street outside his workshop, Sadiq felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him. The city of Lagos, loud and relentless as it was, had suddenly become a stage, and he was at its center, unsure, afraid, but unwilling to move away from the fragile life resting behind him. The engines rolled closer, and Sadiq knew one truth: everything would never be the same again. The low hum of the convoy had grown into a commanding roar as the sleek black cars stopped abruptly, engines idling like sleeping beasts. One by one, they lined the narrow street outside Sadiq's workshop, their polished bodies gleaming under the harsh Lagos sun. The workshop, with its peeling paint and dusty floor, suddenly felt exposed, fragile, like a secret about to be unveiled. Sadiq's hands trembled slightly as he held Amina closer, her fragile body stirring at the vibrations that reached even inside the small room. He had fed her, cared for her, fought for her survival, but now, standing at the edge of his small world, he realized how powerless he truly was. The street that had always been a blur of chaos and noise was now filled with an unnatural, almost oppressive calm. The usual shouts of hawkers, the clatter of metal, even the distant blare of danfo horns all seemed to vanish under the presence of these vehicles. Doors opened with a soft but deliberate hiss. Men in dark suits and crisp shoes emerged, their movements synchronized, almost mechanical. Sadiq's eyes narrowed as he counted at least 6 of them, armed with sleek weapons hidden beneath their jackets, earpieces buzzing faintly, eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced intensity. They were not like any security men he had seen. They did not ask, they commanded; they did not wait, they acted. And in their presence, the small workshop felt like it had been transported into another world, a place where wealth and power bent reality to their will. One of the guards stepped forward first, his eyes immediately finding Sadiq. They were sharp, unreadable, trained to notice every flaw, every hesitation. Sadiq's chest tightened. He had lived his life in careful caution, avoiding unnecessary attention, yet here he was, standing defenseless in front of people who could crush him with a single gesture. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment press down on his shoulders. Another guard moved silently to the side, surveying the rooftops, scanning the alleys, as though expecting danger to leap out from the shadows. Sadiq's mind raced. Were they here for him? For Amina? Were they friend or threat? The answer seemed impossible to determine from their faces, which were carefully neutral, almost frozen in professionalism. The convoy leader remained inside the first car for a moment longer, silent, commanding even from within the tinted windows. Sadiq could not see his expression, but he could feel it, a presence that pressed into the dusty workshop like a physical force. The guard's slow, methodical movements communicated one thing clearly: everything in this street, this little workshop, was now their focus. Sadiq stepped back instinctively, his hand still on Amina, as the silence grew heavier. The city itself seemed to have paused, the usual sounds of Lagos muffled under the weight of the approaching authority. Even the nearby hawker, who had been shouting about roasted corn moments ago, was frozen mid-sentence, eyes wide as if he had seen a ghost. Sadiq's heart pounded in his chest. His eyes flicked to Amina. She stirred slightly, weak but conscious, and reached out a trembling hand as if sensing the same change he felt. The guards spread out, forming a perimeter around the workshop, their presence cutting off escape, transforming the dusty, crowded space into the center of attention for something far bigger than anything Sadiq had ever imagined. The sound of polished shoes on concrete reached his ears as one of the men walked closer to the workshop's entrance. Sadiq's hands gripped Amina's arm tighter, a silent shield against whatever storm was approaching. Outside, the street, once alive with chaos, now carried only the weight of expectation, the heavy silence of power that demanded recognition. Sadiq realized, with a sinking feeling, that life as he had known it, his quiet struggle to keep a dying girl alive in a city that rarely cared, was about to collide with a world of influence and authority so vast that the streets of Lagos themselves seemed to bow before it. And in that silence, he understood that nothing could prepare him for what was coming next. The door of the first black Bentley opened slowly, the movement deliberate, commanding attention. Sadiq's breath caught in his throat as a polished shoe touched the dusty ground. One more step, then another, and the man emerged tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a deep navy suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. A crisp white shirt peeked from beneath the jacket, and his grey-streaked beard was neatly trimmed, giving him an air of authority and experience that could not be ignored. Sadiq instinctively stepped back, shielding Amina as best as he could. Even weak and fragile, she stirred at the presence of the man, lifting her head slightly to see the source of the sudden silence and the heavy energy that had overtaken their small street. Chief Ibrahim Bello paused for a moment, surveying the convoy behind him and the makeshift workshop in front of him. His eyes were sharp, assessing, yet there was something more, something softer, a trace of pain hidden beneath his commanding exterior. He looked at Sadiq first, measuring him with a gaze that seemed to see through every layer of the poor mechanic's life, the dust, the oil-stained hands, the sweat, the fear. Then, almost imperceptibly, his gaze shifted past Sadiq to Amina. The weak girl lying against the wooden bench seemed to pull at something deep inside the billionaire. For a second, his composed facade faltered. His shoulders tensed, his chest rose sharply, as if the air itself had punched him. His eyes softened, and Sadiq felt an unspoken recognition pass between the two, like a lifeline connecting them across the distance that years, pain, and secrecy had created. Sadiq's own hands shook, and the spoon he had held moments ago hovered in the air, forgotten. His mind raced. Who was this man? Why did his presence feel as though it could change everything? The guards behind Chief Bello spread out, forming a protective wall, yet their movements did not detract from the singular focus of the man in front. Chief Bello took one measured step toward the workshop, the polished shoes crunching softly against the dusty ground. The city noise faded even more, replaced by a silence so heavy that Sadiq could hear the faint rustle of Amina's breathing, shallow but alive. Each step the billionaire took seemed to draw the air tighter, compressing the moment into something almost sacred. As he reached the threshold, Chief Bello stopped. He did not speak, did not demand. He simply looked at Amina. The weak girl's eyes fluttered, struggling to focus, but something in her recognition of him sparked a faint life within her. He knelt slowly, as if approaching something delicate, something he had lost long ago and feared would disappear if he moved too fast. Sadiq stepped back, powerless, as the man reached out, careful, almost reverent, as if touching glass. Amina's head lifted slightly against the movement, a weak but unmistakable acknowledgement of the presence that had arrived in her life. Chief Bello's voice finally broke the silence, soft, trembling just slightly, but weighted with authority and emotion. "Amina, my daughter." The words struck Sadiq like a hammer. Every ounce of energy in the street seemed to pause. The guards halted mid-step. The nearby hawkers froze, the city itself holding its breath. Sadiq's hands fell to his sides, his heart racing in disbelief. The girl he had rescued, fed, and fought to keep alive every day was not just a stranger, she was the child of a man whose influence could reshape the entire city. Chief Ibrahim Bello extended his hands toward Amina, steadying her as if she might vanish in the next moment. Sadiq watched, awe and fear battling inside him, as the billionaire's tears glistened in the harsh sunlight, tracing paths down a face that had seen empires rise and fall. The street, the dusty workshop, the noisy Lagos life, all of it seemed to shrink, leaving only the fragile bond of father and daughter, and the silent witness who had kept her alive. For Sadiq, the world shifted in that moment. The life he knew, the struggle, the poverty, the small victories, was no longer separate from a reality of power and wealth. And in that frozen, electric silence, he understood that his quiet acts of kindness had attracted something far greater than he could have imagined, a reckoning, a meeting of lives that destiny had long ago intertwined. The polished knees of Chief Ibrahim Bello hit the dusty ground, sending small clouds of sand drifting around him. For a heartbeat, Sadiq froze, unable to move, unable to speak. The man who had stepped out of the sleek black Bentleys, the image of power and control, was now trembling before the frail girl he had come to find. Tears spilled freely from Chief Bello's eyes, carving wet trails across his weathered cheeks. His hands reached for Amina, trembling as though the fragile touch of his fingers could anchor her to life itself. "My daughter, my Amina," he whispered, his voice breaking into choked sobs that echoed through the narrow street. Amina stirred slightly, her pale lips parting in faint recognition. Her small hand lifted, weak but deliberate, toward the man who had just claimed her as his own. Sadiq watched, heart pounding, as the truth unfolded before him. This was not a stranger, not just a girl abandoned in the shadows of the city. This was the child of Chief Ibrahim Bello, a man whose wealth and influence could command entire streets, who could move armies of people with a single word. The guards, trained to exude control and intimidation, remained stiff and alert, but even they seemed to soften under the weight of this father's grief. Nearby, a street hawker froze mid-call, and a motorbike engine cut off abruptly, as though the entire city had paused to witness this reunion. Chief Bello lowered his head, pressing it gently against Amina's shoulder, almost afraid to breathe. You were gone for so long," he murmured, each word punctuated by quiet gasps for air. "I searched, every day, every night. And now, you are here." His voice was a mixture of relief, heartbreak, and desperation, trembling as it carried across the small workshop and the surrounding street. Sadiq, standing frozen at the edge of the chaos, felt the full weight of the moment. He had fed this girl, kept her alive when the world had walked on, and now he realized the scale of what he had done. He had nurtured the missing child of one of the city's most powerful men. The significance of his quiet acts pressed heavily on him, making his chest tighten and his hands itch to move, though he knew there was nothing he could do but watch. Amina's weak body shifted slightly, her eyes meeting her father's through blurred tears. Recognition flickered in her gaze, a spark of understanding that this was the man who had been searching for her through the fog of her pain and absence. Chief Bello's tears fell onto her hair, staining the pale strands with drops of gold-tinted sunlight. I thought I had lost you forever," Chief Bello choked out, his voice raw and trembling. He cupped her face with careful hands, as if afraid that even the gentlest pressure might break her. I prayed every day for your safety, for this moment, for you to be alive." Sadiq swallowed hard, the lump in his throat preventing any sound. The dusty street, the old tools, the stacked tires, they all faded into insignificance as he witnessed a father's love and pain collide with fate. He realized then that the girl he had protected was not just fragile in body, but fragile in the fragile line between life and death, wealth and obscurity, safety and danger. Chief Bello's sobs grew heavier, his voice rising in a mixture of relief and anguish. "I have searched for you through every corner of this city." And now, he could say no more, his words breaking into raw emotion. He held Amina closer, rocking her slightly, as if in that embrace he could make up for all the lost time, all the nights of worry, all the emptiness he had felt without her. For Sadiq, the moment was both humbling and terrifying. He realized that his actions, small and quiet as they were, had altered the course of one family's destiny and perhaps even the life of a city. The poor mechanic who had once feared the city's indifference now stood at the center of a reunion that seemed larger than life itself. And in that quiet, heavy, tear-filled street, Sadiq understood that the city had finally noticed not him, not the workshop, not even the struggles of the powerless, but the fragile thread of life he had fought so hard to preserve. The sudden weight of Amina's body startled everyone. Her small frame went limp in Chief Bello's arms, and the sound of her shallow, uneven breathing pierced the tense silence of the street. Sadiq's hands itched to do something, anything, but Chief Bello's presence, his protective grip, and the panic in the convoy's guards left him frozen for a moment too long. "Move. Give her space," one of the guards barked sharply, the authority in his voice cutting through the hushed chaos. Sadiq stumbled backward as the guards surrounded the girl, their movements swift and precise. They lifted Amina carefully, supporting her fragile body as though she were a priceless artifact. Sadiq's heart pounded in his chest. He had fed her, held her when she was at her weakest, and now she was slipping from his care into the hands of men who could do everything except replicate the quiet persistence of a man who had stayed with her through hunger and fear. The convoy moved quickly, black Bentleys sliding over the dusty road like liquid shadows. Sadiq followed on foot, his stained blue overalls flapping against his legs, dust rising with each step. His chest heaved with every breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had never felt so powerless, so intensely aware that a single wrong step might mean losing her forever. Inside the private clinic, everything was unnervingly clean. White walls reflected the harsh, clinical lights, Machines beeped in steady rhythms, and the scent of antiseptic stung Sadiq's nostrils. He felt out of place, his hands black with grease, his shoes dusty from Lagos streets, his uniform smelling faintly of engine oil and sweat. Yet here, in this sanitized world, the fragile life of Amina Bello depended on the doctors and nurses moving efficiently around her. Chief Bello's face remained tense, his usual commanding presence replaced by sheer panic. He hovered at Amina's side, whispering to her, smoothing her hair, murmuring prayers under his breath. Sadiq, standing by the door, watched helplessly as machines beeped and monitors flashed warnings. He knew, deep in his chest, that every second counted. Amina had been fading for days, and even now, despite the sterile care, death still lingered in the edges of her fragile body. A nurse approached Chief Bello urgently, checking her pulse, her breathing, her weak responses. "Sir, she's very weak," she said quickly, her voice professional but filled with tension. "We need to observe her closely. She's dehydrated and malnourished." Chief Bello nodded sharply, his fatherly fear transforming into decisive action. He adjusted the four-line, whispered to Sadiq to stay close, and followed every instruction with precision. Yet even as he moved with authority, there was a tremor in his hands, a tightness in his chest, a father's fear that no money or power could erase. Sadiq hovered near Amina, unsure if he should step forward, unsure if his presence would be helpful or disruptive. He had watched her every day in that small, dusty workshop, felt the slow rise and fall of her chest, the hesitation in her swallow, the tiny strength she summoned to take another bite of food. Now, in the sterile white room, he realized just how close she had come to slipping away completely. Chief Bello's voice was steady but low, trembling only slightly as he whispered encouragements to Amina. "It's okay, my daughter. I'm here. Stay with me." He kept her close, his hands gentle but firm, cradling her as though letting go for even a second might undo everything. Sadiq's chest tightened, realizing that this powerful man, so used to controlling people, wealth, and entire cities, was now at the mercy of a fragile life, just like anyone else. Machines beeped faster as Amina's pulse faltered slightly. The doctors moved quickly, adjusting monitors, administering fluids, and checking vital signs. Sadiq's stomach churned, his fingers clenched into fists at his sides. He had never been so acutely aware of time, of life, of the fine line between survival and loss. Every second stretched like an eternity. Chief Bello, still holding Amina, glanced at Sadiq, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something heavier, something like understanding that only comes from seeing life balanced on a knife's edge. You took care of her when I could not," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Without you, she might not be here." Sadiq shook his head, unable to speak. He had done what anyone would have done, but now he realized the full weight of that choice. Amina's life had been fragile, slipping, threatened by both her past and the city's indifference, and yet, through nothing more than patience, care, and persistence, he had kept her alive. As the doctors worked and monitors beeped, Sadiq remained by her side, silently vowing that he would not leave. Not now, not when she was this close to the edge. And even as Chief Bello's presence filled the room with authority, Sadiq understood something deeply: wealth and power could not save her. Only love, care, and unwavering persistence could, and he had already shown that he was capable of both. Outside the room, the convoy guards ensured privacy, keeping the world at bay. Inside, Sadiq watched the fragile rhythm of life in Amina's chest, the rise and fall of her small body, and prayed silently, hoping that she would fight, hoping that she would survive, hoping that his quiet acts of daily kindness had been enough to turn the tide. The morning sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the private clinic, painting long, clean lines across the polished floors. Inside, the sterile white walls seemed almost too bright, too cold, yet they held life in a fragile form. Amina Bello lay on the hospital bed, her breathing steady but faint, her body still thin and frail from days of neglect. Machines hummed softly around her, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath, every tiny movement. Sadiq Adeyemi stood quietly near the door, his hands folded in front of him, the blue stains of grease on his overalls a stark contrast against the immaculate environment. His chest tightened every time he glanced at her. He had fed her, washed her, and stayed with her through fear, hunger, and weakness. Yet seeing her here, in this white-walled room, he felt both relief and helplessness. The city streets, the chaos of Lagos, the grime of the roadside, it all seemed far away, almost unreal. Chief Ibrahim Bello sat beside Amina, his hand gently holding hers. The weight of his power, usually so commanding, now bent beneath a father's fear and gratitude. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were soft, full of relief and an almost childlike tenderness. "She is alive because of you," he said quietly, turning toward Sadiq. His voice carried the weight of a man who had commanded industries, armies of workers, and entire city blocks, yet here, he was simply a father in awe of a stranger's kindness. Sadiq's throat tightened. He swallowed and shook his head. "I just did what I could," he said softly. "I could not leave her, not like that." Chief Bello's lips curved slightly, a faint, almost hesitant smile. "No, you don't understand. You saved her life. Every meal, every care, every moment you spent, it is because of you that she is still here." His voice faltered, the magnitude of the situation pressing down on him. "You were her lifeline when she had none." Amina stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open. She blinked against the bright light, her gaze slowly finding Sadiq. For a moment, recognition passed through her tired eyes, and a faint, weak smile touched her lips. You saved me," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steady enough to carry the truth. I don't even know how to, thank you." Sadiq felt a lump rise in his throat. "No thanks needed," he murmured. "Just, stay strong. That's all I ask." Chief Bello's eyes were fixed on Sadiq now, and there was a quiet understanding in his gaze. Here was a man who had nothing, who risked everything, yet had performed an act more valuable than money, influence, or power. "I owe you more than words can say," he admitted, his voice low. "You have given my daughter her life back. More than that, you've given her hope." Sadiq's hands twitched at his sides, as if he wanted to reach out, to touch the fragile bond forming in the room, yet he knew some moments were too delicate for action. He watched as Amina lifted her hand slightly, her fingers brushing against her father's, then slowly reaching toward him. Chief Bello noticed and gave a gentle nod, an unspoken permission for Sadiq to come closer. Sadiq stepped to the bedside, careful not to disturb the monitors or the fragile balance of her condition. "It was not just me," he said softly, glancing at her. "You fought too, every swallow, every tiny breath, you didn't give up. I just stayed." Amina's lips trembled, and she let out a faint laugh, weak but full of emotion. I don't remember the last time someone stayed with me, someone truly cared, like you did." Her gaze turned toward her father, the bond between rescuer and family subtly strengthening. He kept me alive, Daddy. Even when I could barely move, he stayed." Chief Bello nodded, swallowing hard, emotion thick in his throat. "You did everything right," he said to Sadiq. "And now, I want to ensure you are part of our family, in whatever way you wish." Sadiq shook his head, still hesitant. "I am not part of your world. I fix cars, I repair machines. I am not used to wealth, power," his voice faltered. "I just did what anyone would do if they could." But Chief Bello's eyes were steady, full of a father's resolve and gratitude. "This is different," he said softly. "Your actions have value far beyond anything you may know. You are part of her story, of her life. And that makes you part of mine." Sadiq glanced at Amina, who managed a weak, grateful smile. In that small, sterile room, an unspoken understanding passed between the three of them. Trust, gratitude, and the fragile beginnings of respect formed an invisible bond stronger than any money, influence, or power could create. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the life-altering events unfolding within these white walls. The noise, the chaos, the endless struggle of Lagos remained beyond the clinic doors. Inside, however, truth and care had taken root, and Sadiq understood, with quiet humility, that sometimes the greatest stories of the city were written not on its streets, but in moments of human connection and sacrifice. Chief Bello's gaze softened as he placed a hand on Sadiq's shoulder. "You have given us both a second chance," he said quietly. "And that is priceless." Sadiq's heart swelled with a mixture of pride, relief, and an almost unbearable humility. In the stark white of the clinic, surrounded by the hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic, he realized something profoundly simple. A life saved is more powerful than any fortune, and the bond created through selfless care could change everything. The three of them remained there for a long moment, each processing the depth of what had happened. Amina, still weak, squeezed her father's hand lightly, then turned towards Sadiq, her eyes reflecting gratitude, recognition, and something deeper, an understanding that he had become more than just a stranger. He had become her lifeline, her witness, and perhaps, her unexpected protector in a city that had often turned away from the weak. Outside, the city continued to roar, but inside, behind the white walls, a quiet truth had settled. Sadiq Adeyemi had not only saved a life, he had redefined the meaning of care, trust, and human connection, and the bond between rescuer and family now promised to grow stronger with each passing day. The private clinic was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional shuffle of nurses moving down the polished hallways. Chief Ibrahim Bello sat stiffly beside his daughter's bed, his eyes never leaving Amina's pale, fragile face. Every now and then, he would gently squeeze her hand, as if the simple pressure could reassure both of them that she was truly safe. Sadiq Adeyemi stood near the door, still in his grease-stained overalls, watching silently as the billionaire father's eyes darted between his daughter and him. Chief Ibrahim's expression was unreadable at first, but the sharp crease of worry between his brows and the tension in his jaw betrayed the storm of questions building inside him. He had his wealth, his influence, his power, but none of that mattered when it came to understanding how his only child had ended up on the streets, so weak and alone that her life had been hanging by a thread. After a long moment of silence, Chief Ibrahim spoke, his voice steady but heavy with urgency. Sadiq, I need to know everything. From the day you found her. I need to understand how my daughter ended up in the streets. Who did this to her? Who let this happen? His hands gripped hers tightly, knuckles white, and his eyes, dark and commanding, searched Sadiq's face for answers. Sadiq swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the man's authority pressing down on him. He wanted to speak, but the words felt fragile in his throat, unsure if he could articulate the danger, the fear, and the confusion that had surrounded Amina's last days on the street. Sir, he began cautiously, I do not know exactly who hurt her. I only know what I found and what she told me in fragments, in whispers, barely strong enough to form words. Chief Ibrahim's eyes narrowed. Fragments. Whispers. Sadiq, I need more than fragments. There is a reason she was alone, and it is not just misfortune. There is someone, some group, behind this. I can feel it. Her disappearance, it was not random. Sadiq nodded, his mind replaying the memory of the frightened girl, the weakness in her body, the fear in her eyes as she had tried to tell him of the men who had held her, but could not finish the story. Sir, she mentioned men. She said they left her near the road, when she became too weak. She could not tell me their names. She was afraid. Very afraid. Chief Ibrahim's fists clenched at his sides. The fine line of his jaw became even sharper, and his usual calm, commanding presence now carried a tense edge of a father's protective fury. Men, he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Do you have any idea why? Did she know them? Could she describe them? Sadiq shook his head, regret and helplessness flickering across his face. No, sir. She could not. She was too weak, and, the things she remembered, they frightened her. She trusted me enough to stay alive, but she could not speak the full truth yet. Chief Ibrahim leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for a moment as if trying to summon clarity from somewhere deep within. When he opened them again, they burned with intensity. Sadiq, I am asking you to help me uncover this. I will use my resources, my contacts, everything I have, but I need someone who was there, someone who understands what she endured, someone who stayed with her when no one else did. His gaze sharpened. I need you to tell me everything, Sadiq. Everything you observed, everything she said, every detail matters. Sadiq's heart raced. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, heavier than any car engine he had ever lifted, heavier than any tool he had ever wielded. He realized that, somehow, he had become part of a dangerous story that was far beyond his little workshop in Lagos. Yet the thought of Amina, still fragile and recovering, strengthened his resolve. "I will, sir," he said quietly but firmly. "I will tell you everything I saw and heard. But it is possible that the truth may be darker than we expect." Chief Ibrahim's gaze did not waver. "Then we will face it together. No excuses. No delays. I will not allow anyone to hurt my daughter again." His words carried the weight of authority, but also of deep, personal desperation. "Sadiq, I trust you. You have already saved her life. Now help me save the rest of it." Sadiq nodded, swallowing hard. He knew the path ahead would not be simple. The streets of Lagos were full of shadows, full of danger, full of people who would exploit weakness. But he also knew that he could not abandon Amina now, not when her life, and perhaps the uncovering of a dark secret, depended on his courage and honesty. Outside the clinic, the city roared on, unaware of the urgent questions being asked behind the white walls. Inside, a quiet determination settled. Sadiq Adeyemi and Chief Ibrahim Bello were about to enter a world of hidden dangers, dark crimes, and secrets that could shake the city. And for Amina, every whispered truth could either bring safety, or reveal horrors she had barely survived. The quiet beeping of the monitors continued, a rhythmic reminder that time was moving forward, that questions demanded answers, and that the fragile girl lying in the bed was at the heart of a story far larger than anyone in the room yet understood. Sadiq took a deep breath, steeling himself. This was only the beginning. The morning sun had barely touched the streets of Lagos when Sadiq Adeyemi arrived at what used to be his small roadside workshop. He blinked against the bright light, still carrying the faint scent of engine oil on his hands and the memory of Amina's fragile breaths from the night before. But the sight that greeted him made him stop in his tracks. Where a single dusty structure once stood, now rose a massive, modern mechanic complex. Its walls gleamed white, and glass panels reflected the Lagos skyline like mirrors. Rows of brand-new cars, some belonging to corporations, others to the elite, lined up neatly in multiple bays. Engineers in clean uniforms moved with precision and purpose, and each corner of the workshop had signs of luxury, yet it retained the heart of a place where work was done with care. A huge signboard bore the name, Adeyemi Automotive Solutions. Sadiq's heart thumped loudly in his chest. He stepped closer, his rough hands brushing the metal railing as though to confirm it was real. A group of young engineers, noticing him, stopped their work to greet him with respect and awe. "Morning, Mr. Adeyemi," one of them said politely. "Everything is ready for today." For a moment, Sadiq felt out of place. Just yesterday, he had been bending over oil-stained tires, feeding a dying girl with his last spoonfuls of rice. Today, he was being treated like the head of a major company, his hands still blackened with grease, but his eyes wide with disbelief. He heard a familiar sound behind him, the soft footsteps of expensive shoes on polished floors. Turning, he saw Chief Ibrahim Bello, smiling warmly, his usual powerful presence softened by the satisfaction of keeping a promise. "Sadiq," the billionaire said, "welcome to what you deserve." Sadiq's throat tightened. "Sir, I don't understand. All of this." He gestured vaguely to the complex, to the luxury cars, to the buzzing engineers. Chief Ibrahim chuckled, a deep, controlled sound. "You saved my daughter. You fed her. You cared for her when the world would have looked the other way. I promised you that your kindness would not go unnoticed. Lagos must see it too." Sadiq shook his head in disbelief. "Sir, I never expected anything. I was just doing what I could." "That is exactly why this is yours," Chief Ibrahim said firmly. "Not because of what you asked for, but because of who you are. Adeyemi Automotive Solutions is now yours to run. Every tool, every bay, every engineer, they are here for you. And in time, you will grow beyond even this." Sadiq's legs trembled, and he pressed his hand to his mouth. He wanted to speak, but no words could capture the shock and gratitude that flooded him. He looked toward the entrance of the workshop, half expecting Amina to appear and smile up at him. Just then, she did. Amina stepped gracefully into the new complex, her hair neatly tied, her dress simple but elegant. Her face was still pale, but the warmth in her eyes mirrored the sunlight that streamed through the glass panels. She approached him slowly, her movements careful, yet confident. Sadiq, she said softly, thank you, for everything. The words hit him harder than the sight of the massive workshop. She had survived because of him. And now, the city had witnessed the result of one man's simple act of kindness. The engineers paused to watch the reunion, and even the cars seemed to shimmer brighter in the morning sun. Chief Ibrahim placed a hand gently on Sadiq's shoulder. You see, Lagos, he said loudly, projecting so everyone could hear, this man saved my daughter. He deserves more than gratitude. He deserves opportunity. And today, I am giving it to him. Crowds began to gather outside, neighbors and passerby staring at the sprawling complex that had appeared almost overnight. Whispers filled the streets. Is this the same Sadiq Adeyemi? The poor mechanic. Chief Ibrahim actually built him this. Sadiq felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of his world. Yet amidst the shock and awe, he felt a quiet pride, the kind that could not be bought or sold. He remembered every late night, every spoon of rice fed to Amina, every moment he had chosen courage over fear. It had led him here. Amina stepped closer, her hand brushing his. You didn't just save my life, she said, her voice soft but steady. You gave me hope. And now, you've changed your own life too. Sadiq looked around once more, at the engineers, the shining cars, the gleaming floors, and finally at Amina and Chief Ibrahim. He realized something profound. Lagos was a city that could crush or elevate, destroy or reward. And sometimes, just sometimes, it rewarded those whose hearts refused to stop giving. Chief Ibrahim smiled, eyes twinkling with satisfaction. Sadiq, this is only the beginning. You will see how far your kindness can take you. Sadiq nodded slowly, still trying to process the miracle that had unfolded before him. But deep in his heart, he understood that life had changed in a way that could never be undone. The city had witnessed a story of courage, hope, and generosity that would ripple far beyond a single street. And as the workers returned to their tasks, and the luxury cars roared to life, Sadiq felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. His life was no longer just about survival, it was about building, about leading, and about honoring the trust and life he had been given to protect. Outside, Lagos continued its chaotic rhythm, but inside Adeyemi Automotive Solutions, the quiet power of kindness had made a statement louder than any engine roar. The poor mechanic had been rewarded, and the city could not ignore it. This was only the beginning. The days following the grand opening of Adeyemi Automotive Solutions moved quickly, yet for Sadiq Adeyemi, each moment felt surreal. The once dusty streets of Lagos had become a distant memory as he navigated through offices filled with polished floors, engineers in crisp uniforms, and the low hum of well-tuned machines. Yet, despite the grandeur around him, his mind often wandered to Amina Bello, the girl whose fragile life had once depended entirely on his simple acts of care. Amina was recovering well. Her color returned slowly, and her strength came back in small, careful steps. She moved through the new complex with quiet grace, observing the engineers, asking questions about the tools, and sometimes sitting with Sadiq, watching him work as he did before but now, surrounded by resources and people who could assist. There was a rhythm to their days, one that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the streets where she had been found. Despite her elegance and wealth, Amina did not shy away from Sadiq's world. She would often step into the bays where cars were being serviced, her shoes clicking softly on the polished floors, watching him inspect engines, tighten bolts, or adjust machinery. Yet, the gulf between them was evident. Sadiq's hands, strong and calloused from years of toil, contrasted with her delicate fingers. His skin carried the faint stains of oil and sweat, while hers bore none of the physical reminders of struggle. Their worlds were different, one shaped by survival, the other by privilege, but their shared history created a bond that neither fully understood. Sadiq often caught himself staring at her in quiet moments, marveling at how someone who had been so close to death could now stand confidently in a world that had once seemed so far beyond her reach. He remembered the night he had found her, collapsed behind tires, her small body trembling in the rain-soaked darkness. The memory was vivid, the desperation in her eyes, the weakness in her hands, the struggle of each breath. And yet, here she was, slowly reclaiming her life, yet still tethered in some inexplicable way to him. Amina, for her part, seemed drawn to Sadiq in ways she did not yet understand. She asked about the engines, the cars, the tools, but she also asked about him, about his life before the workshop expanded, about the nights he had spent alone, about the food he had risked giving her day after day. She listened intently as he recounted small fragments of his past, carefully omitting details that could alarm her, yet revealing enough to paint a picture of resilience. One afternoon, as the Lagos sun streamed through the glass walls, Amina joined Sadiq at a workbench. He was adjusting a luxury sedan's engine, explaining the intricate process to a young apprentice. She leaned slightly over his shoulder, observing silently, her eyes tracing his movements. "You know," she said softly, "even after everything, you've stayed the same. You've never let the city change who you are." Sadiq paused, wiping his hands on a cloth that was still faintly stained with oil. He glanced at her, meeting her eyes, and for a moment, the distance between their worlds felt smaller, almost negligible. "The city doesn't change you," he said quietly. "It's your choices that matter. Every day, I decide how to live, how to treat people, how to keep moving forward." Amina smiled faintly, her gaze softening. "And yet, here I am," she said, almost to herself, "living in a world I barely know, learning from someone I never expected to meet in the middle of it." Their moments together were growing longer, more comfortable. They laughed quietly when machines beeped unexpectedly or when an apprentice made a clumsy mistake. Yet, there was an underlying awareness that their worlds were very different. Sadiq's past was marked by struggle, by uncertainty and hunger, while Amina's had been shaped by privilege, by protection, and by a world that rarely demanded resilience. Still, despite the contrasts, they found common ground in the shared experience that had brought them together: the night of rain, the fear, the fragility of life, and the act of trust that had bound them. Every shared glance, every conversation, every small smile became a bridge across their two different worlds. Sadiq began to realize that he was no longer just Amina's rescuer. He was a part of her present, and perhaps, her future. And Amina, in turn, was becoming more than just the girl he had saved. She was a companion, someone who could challenge him, inspire him, and slowly teach him to navigate a life beyond survival. But even as they grew closer, a quiet tension lingered in the air, unspoken yet palpable. Both knew that the world outside their workshop did not see their bond. Lagos, with its gossiping neighbors, envious competitors, and unpredictable streets, had a way of testing relationships, especially those that crossed class and social lines. Still, for the first time in both their lives, Sadiq and Amina felt a fragile sense of hope. Two different worlds had collided, and though the path ahead was uncertain, they were beginning to walk it together one step at a time, each step careful, deliberate, and filled with the promise of something more. The city outside continued to hum with noise, ambition, and chaos, but inside the walls of Adeyemi Automotive Solutions, a quiet connection was taking root, stronger than wealth, stronger than survival, and potentially stronger than the challenges they had yet to face. The weeks after Amina's recovery passed slowly but with a rhythm that Sadiq and she had come to rely on. Each morning, Sadiq arrived early at Adeyemi Automotive Solutions, checking engines, guiding apprentices, and ensuring the workshop ran smoothly. Amina, though still regaining full strength, began accompanying him more often, not just to watch, but to participate in small ways. She asked questions, offered suggestions, and sometimes handed him tools, her hands surprisingly steady despite everything she had endured. Their interactions were careful at first, polite, and measured. Amina still carried the fragility of her recent past, and Sadiq remained conscious of the boundaries between them. Yet, as days turned into weeks, the quiet companionship between them began to shift. There were moments when their hands brushed as she handed him a wrench, when their eyes met across the workshop and lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, or when laughter escaped them unexpectedly at a shared joke. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but undeniable to them both. Chief Ibrahim Bello, however, was never far from their awareness. The billionaire had remained deeply involved in ensuring Amina's safety and well-being, but his presence extended beyond mere protection. He watched quietly from a distance, observing the dynamic between Sadiq and his daughter with a careful, calculating eye. Though he trusted Sadiq's character and had already rewarded him generously, Chief Ibrahim could not ignore the undercurrents of emotion growing between them. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across the workshop floor, Sadiq leaned over the hood of a luxury SUV, tightening a complicated component while Amina observed. "You've learned fast," he said, tightening the final bolt with precision. "I didn't expect you to pick it up so quickly." Amina smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've had a good teacher," she replied. Her gaze lingered on his face longer than it needed to, and for a heartbeat, the hum of the machines seemed to fade around them. Chief Ibrahim, standing across the room, noticed the subtle exchange. He studied Sadiq's quiet focus and the way Amina's eyes followed him, her admiration evident. He had expected gratitude, perhaps respect, but this was something more. Something that made him uneasy. He walked slowly among the cars, listening to the soft clinks of tools and the occasional murmur of conversation, his mind weighing the unpredictable nature of hearts and fate. As the day wore on, their interactions became more relaxed. Amina began asking Sadiq questions about his childhood, about the streets of Lagos before he had become known, about the nights he had spent hungry or exhausted. And Sadiq, in turn, found himself revealing small truths, stories he had once reserved for himself, memories of struggle and survival, the quiet triumphs he had never shared with anyone. At one point, Sadiq showed her how to properly measure engine pressure, his hands guiding hers. The closeness, the shared focus, the almost imperceptible contact sparked a warmth neither could fully ignore. Amina's laughter at a minor misstep was soft but genuine, and Sadiq felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. Chief Ibrahim paused behind a polished car, his hands folded, his face thoughtful. He had witnessed many things in his life, business deals, betrayals, loyalty, but human hearts were unpredictable, and this connection was growing before his eyes. The billionaire felt a surge of protectiveness, tempered by the realization that he could not and perhaps should not control everything. He had rescued his daughter, ensured her survival, and rewarded the man who had saved her. Yet love was not something he could legislate or demand. It had to unfold, quietly and carefully, like a seed growing in the shade. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the workshop in gold and amber, Sadiq and Amina found themselves alone in a quieter corner, away from the engineers and the noise of machinery. Their conversation drifted from engines to dreams, from past hardships to hopes for the future. There was a softness in their words, a hesitance tempered by mutual respect, and a burgeoning awareness of something deeper. Chief Ibrahim observed from a distance, his mind torn between reassurance and concern. He saw the way Amina's eyes softened when she looked at Sadiq, the subtle ease in his posture when she was near. He understood that the bond they shared was more than gratitude or simple companionship. It was tentative, fragile, yet undeniable. As the workshop lights flickered on, casting long shadows across polished floors, Chief Ibrahim whispered to himself, more as a reflection than a warning, "Fate has brought them together, but can it be trusted?" Sadiq and Amina, unaware of the watchful eyes following them, lingered just a little longer in that quiet corner. Their hands nearly touched once more, then drew back, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings they dared not yet name. The city outside continued to roar, but inside the workshop, something more powerful than engines was growing, a quiet, steady pulse of connection, hope, and the tentative beginnings of love. The news spread like wildfire across Lagos. By morning, every street, every market, every radio station seemed to carry the story. Sadiq Adeyemi, the poor mechanic who had saved the billionaire's missing daughter, was now engaged to Amina Bello, the city's most talked-about young woman. The announcement came quietly from Chief Ibrahim Bello, but it did not stay quiet for long. Social media erupted, neighbors whispered, and even the city's tabloids seemed to sense a story that would not fade. For Sadiq, it was surreal. The man who had once walked the streets with nothing but his tools and determination now found himself at the center of a citywide debate. He had never sought fame, nor did he understand the magnitude of what this engagement would mean for his life. He felt the weight of judgment pressing from every corner. Would people ever see him as anything other than a mechanic? Could they overlook his humble past and recognize the courage and heart that had led him to save Amina? Amina, meanwhile, was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had survived near death only because of Sadiq's care. He had fed her, protected her, and stood beside her when the world had seemed indifferent. Her heart was drawn to him, quietly but undeniably. Yet she also understood the expectations that came with her name. Her family, her father's peers, even distant acquaintances, would not view this union lightly. Many assumed that someone of Sadiq's background could never match the prestige and wealth associated with the Bello family. The public response was immediate. Newspapers ran headlines with dramatic flair: "Mechanic to marry billionaire's daughter?" "From wrenches to weddings, Sadiq's rise?" Talk shows invited guests to discuss the engagement, and people debated it as though it were a matter of national importance. Some celebrated Sadiq's courage and character, praising the man who had chosen kindness over indifference. Others scoffed at the match, arguing that social and economic divides were not so easily bridged. Inside the Bello residence, private tension simmered. Chief Ibrahim, who had once trusted Sadiq with his daughter's life, now wrestled with the implications of publicly endorsing the engagement. While he admired Sadiq's integrity, he could not ignore the scrutiny and potential scandal. Family friends and business partners had begun to ask questions, some blunt, some subtle, about whether this union would be acceptable in elite circles. Sadiq felt it all acutely. Every time he stepped into his workshop, he sensed the eyes of the city upon him. Even his apprentices, normally focused on engines and repairs, whispered in corners about the mechanic who dared to marry a billionaire's daughter. Sadiq tried to block out the noise, focusing instead on the quiet bond he shared with Amina. Yet, the city's judgment loomed like a shadow, threatening to intrude even on their moments of private connection. Amina, aware of Sadiq's discomfort, reached out in small ways. She visited the workshop more often, helping with minor tasks, asking questions about cars, and sometimes just sitting beside him as the sun dipped behind the Lagos skyline. In those moments, the world outside seemed to pause, and the noise of gossip and judgment faded into the background. Yet the tension could not be ignored. Chief Ibrahim, sensing the strain, scheduled a private meeting with Sadiq one evening in the quiet of the billionaire's office. The room overlooked the Lagos skyline, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. "Sadiq," Chief Ibrahim began, his voice steady but heavy, "you have my trust, my gratitude, and my respect. But this engagement will not be simple. The city, the media, and even some family members may judge harshly. Are you ready for that?" Sadiq swallowed hard, feeling the magnitude of the question. He had saved Amina's life, yes, but marriage meant a commitment far beyond courage. It meant enduring public scrutiny, navigating wealth and privilege, and bridging a world he had never known. "Sir," he replied slowly, "I don't care what they say. My concern is her safety, her happiness. That is all that matters to me." Chief Ibrahim studied him for a long moment. He saw honesty, loyalty, and an unshakable integrity. Yet he also saw the challenges that awaited them, the whispers, the judgment, the city that often punished kindness and humility when it stood against wealth and status. Meanwhile, in the bustling streets of Lagos, neighbors and passers-by debated endlessly. Hawkers spoke of the engagement with a mix of awe and disbelief. Drivers honked, some in celebration, others in mockery. The story became part of everyday conversation, a mirror reflecting the city's fascination with wealth, power, and the audacity of love. As night fell, Sadiq returned to the quiet of his workshop. Amina awaited him, sitting on the old wooden bench he had once used to feed her. Their hands met briefly, a silent promise in the dim light. "They will talk," she said softly. "But we have each other." Sadiq nodded, holding her hand tightly. "Let them," he whispered. "As long as we stay true, nothing else matters." Outside, the city of Lagos hummed with energy, lights flickering across the skyline, unaware that in a small corner of its vast expanse, a love that defied status, wealth, and expectation was quietly taking root. The engagement had divided the city, but it had also set the stage for a story that would challenge hearts, test loyalties, and push boundaries far beyond what anyone could imagine. And in that moment, as the workshop settled into evening quiet, Sadiq and Amina understood one truth: the world could judge, gossip, and doubt, but the bond between them was already unbreakable. The day had been meant for celebration. Lagos shimmered under the late afternoon sun, the streets alive with chatter and the hum of traffic. Sadiq's workshop, now transformed into a sprawling mechanic complex, gleamed with new machines, polished floors, and banners commemorating the union of Amina Bello and himself. The workers bustled about, preparing the space for a small gathering of friends, family, and close associates. Yet, beneath the laughter and excitement, a tension lingered, a subtle unease that no one could name. Sadiq arrived early, adjusting his clean overalls and checking the alignment of the newly installed lifts. His hands, once perpetually stained with grease, now seemed almost foreign in their cleanliness. Despite the changes, his heart beat as it had on the first day he had found Amina, with cautious anticipation, a mixture of pride and fear. Today was supposed to be a symbol of hope, a life rebuilt from nothing, a journey from despair to recognition. Amina appeared shortly after, radiant in a simple yet elegant dress. Her hair was neatly tied back, her face still pale from her recovery, but her eyes shone with a quiet strength that had drawn Sadiq to her from the very first day. She walked among the guests, greeting workers and family alike, her voice soft but confident. She paused by Sadiq, brushing a hand against his arm. "They're all excited to see you," she said with a small smile. "But don't let it shake you." Sadiq nodded, though he felt the weight of every eye upon him. He had become a figure of curiosity, admiration, and, for some, suspicion. He tried to focus on Amina, on the laughter of the workers and the chatter of those who had come to honor their connection, but a small, persistent knot of anxiety tightened in his chest. Something in the air told him that this day, though meant for joy, might carry shadows he had yet to see. It was then that the man arrived. No one had noticed him approach at first. He moved quietly, slipping through the gathering with a calm that unnerved. His clothes were worn, his eyes sharp and unyielding, and there was a presence about him that drew immediate attention. Guests paused mid-conversation, sensing a disruption, though they could not yet see its source. Sadiq's heart sank as recognition sparked. This was not a friend, nor a neutral observer. This was someone from the past, a past he had tried to leave behind. The man stopped in the center of the workshop, holding a folded document tightly in his hands. His eyes scanned the room with precision before landing squarely on Sadiq. "You," he said, voice clear, calm, yet edged with accusation. Every head turned, murmurs spreading like wildfire among the gathered crowd. "You've hidden the truth for too long." Sadiq felt his stomach tighten. Every moment of his past, the mistakes, the desperation, the nights spent in fear rose to the surface with a sudden, suffocating force. He had worked so hard to build a new life, to protect Amina and himself from the shadows of what had once been. And now, here it was, returning unbidden, bringing with it threats and judgment. The man took a deliberate step forward, holding the document higher. "This man," he said, pointing at Sadiq, "is not who you think he is. His past is dangerous. He has hidden secrets, and the people here have a right to know." Gasps echoed through the workshop. Some guests recoiled, some whispered anxiously, and even Amina's eyes widened in disbelief. Sadiq's mind raced. He knew the man, Felix, a figure from years ago, when he had been nothing more than a young mechanic struggling to survive. Felix had been involved in the underworld of the city, a man whose word carried weight among the dangerous circles Sadiq had narrowly escaped. The accusations he now brought threatened to undo every step forward, to paint Sadiq as someone unworthy, someone dangerous. Chief Ibrahim stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. The crowd fell silent immediately, sensing that the billionaire father's judgment was final. "Explain yourself," Chief Ibrahim said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "What is this about?" Felix's lips curled into a thin, controlled smile. "The truth," he said simply. "Sadiq Adeyemi has lived a life he did not fully reveal. He has hidden his past from all of you. And now, on this day of celebration, it is time everyone knows who he really is." Sadiq swallowed hard, his pulse racing. The celebration, the laughter, the pride, it all seemed to evaporate in an instant, replaced by a growing tension that wrapped around him like a vice. He had survived hunger, fear, and the streets of Lagos. He had saved Amina, nurtured her back to life, and won the trust of one of the wealthiest men in the city. But could he withstand the weight of his own history now confronting him openly? Guests shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Sadiq and Felix. Amina stepped forward instinctively, her hand brushing Sadiq's arm, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. Sadiq, she whispered softly, who is he? What is this? Sadiq took a deep breath, feeling the room close around him. Every memory, every choice, every risk he had taken bubbled to the surface. He began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years, I will tell the truth. All of it. But not here. Not like this. Felix laughed lightly, a sound that carried through the tension-filled air. You can try to hide it, but the city remembers. And I will not let this day go unchallenged. Chief Ibrahim's jaw tightened. He glanced at Amina, who stood pale but firm. Sadiq, he said quietly, yet with unmistakable authority, you will speak. And the truth will decide your path. The workshop, once alive with celebration, now seemed suspended in a heavy silence. The air was thick with anticipation, judgment, and fear. Outside, the city of Lagos went on, unaware that in a single corner, a man's past had returned with the power to unravel the life he had rebuilt so carefully. Sadiq's eyes met Amina's. Her presence gave him a fleeting courage, a reminder of why he had fought so hard to survive. He squared his shoulders, prepared to face the storm that had come for him. But as he opened his mouth to speak, the guards and guests held their collective breath, waiting to see if the man who had once been nothing would finally reveal the secrets that could change everything. The story paused here, unresolved, as the city outside continued its hum. Every eye in the workshop was fixed on Sadiq, every heart beating with a question that no one could yet answer. What would happen when the truth finally emerged? The atmosphere in Lagos had shifted. News spread quickly, first as whispers among curious passers-by, then through the city's streets like wildfire. Sadiq Adeyemi, once a poor mechanic with nothing but determination and grease-stained hands, now faced a storm he had long thought behind him. His past, quiet for so many years, was clawing its way back to the surface, threatening to undo everything he had built, from the rescue of Amina to the respect he had earned from Chief Ibrahim and the city's elite. It started with a knock on the door of his newly renovated workshop. The sound was sharp, deliberate, and it cut through the early morning hum of Lagos traffic. Sadiq, who had been overseeing the polishing of a newly repaired engine, froze. The knock came again, louder this time. His stomach tightened. Something in his gut told him this was not ordinary business. Before he could react further, the workshop doors burst open. Several men in plain clothes stepped inside, their expressions serious, their movements calculated. One of them, a tall officer with a thin mustache, held up a badge. Sadiq Adeyemi, he asked. His voice was firm, devoid of emotion. Sadiq's heart sank. Yes, he said cautiously, wiping his hands on a rag, trying to appear calm despite the rising fear. What is this about? The officer produced a document, showing it briefly before tucking it back into his coat. You are under arrest for a charge from years ago. We have reopened your case, and you are to come with us immediately. Gasps echoed from the few workers who had gathered around. Amina, who had been arranging flowers for a small celebration, froze mid-step. Her eyes met Sadiq's, filled with shock and disbelief. What are they saying? She whispered. Sadiq's mind raced. He had been arrested once before, years ago, during a time when he had been struggling to survive, accused of theft in a case he had nothing to do with. The court had eventually released him due to lack of evidence, but the memory of the ordeal had stayed with him, a constant reminder of how precarious life in Lagos could be for someone without power or influence. And now, it seemed, that chapter had been reopened. Chief Ibrahim, alerted by the commotion, appeared at the entrance of the workshop. His presence immediately commanded silence. What is happening here? He demanded, his eyes scanning the officers and finally resting on Sadiq. The lead officer spoke, careful but firm. Sir, we have evidence suggesting past involvement in a crime. We are taking him for questioning. This is a procedural matter. Chief Ibrahim's jaw tightened. Procedural or not, you will not humiliate him in front of innocent people. Do your job with respect. His tone carried the weight of authority, yet it did little to calm the growing tension. Sadiq looked at Amina, his heart aching at the thought of leaving her side in the middle of her recovery. I will come back, he said quietly, though the certainty in his voice wavered. I am innocent. They know I am innocent. The officers did not answer. One gently, but firmly, took hold of Sadiq's arm and guided him toward the waiting vehicle outside. The city noise seemed distant now, muted against the pounding of his heartbeat. Neighbors had gathered, curious and judgmental eyes following the scene, and the whispers of his past crimes spread like fire through the small crowd. Inside the car, Sadiq's mind raced. He remembered every moment of the previous ordeal, the fear, the hunger, the feeling of helplessness when authorities had judged him without truth. And now, after building a new life, after saving Amina and gaining the trust of one of the wealthiest men in Lagos, he faced the same kind of judgment again. Amina appeared at the open door, her hand pressed to her chest. "Sadiq," she called, her voice cracking. "I believe in you. They can't take you, they can't." Sadiq turned briefly, catching her gaze. Her faith in him gave him a fleeting courage, a reminder of why he had survived the harsh streets of Lagos and why he had nurtured hope when the city itself seemed indifferent. "Wait for me," he whispered. "I will come back." The car pulled away, leaving behind the workshop, now eerily silent, except for the soft murmur of concerned onlookers. In the distance, the towering skyline of Lagos reflected the late afternoon sun, unaware of the storm brewing in the life of a man who had tried so hard to escape his past. As Sadiq was driven to the station, questions swirled in his mind. Who had reopened the case? Why now? And most importantly, how would he prove his innocence when the city's memory was so short, and judgment so swift? The answers remained unknown, suspended like the humid Lagos air around him, leaving his fate and the future of everything he had worked for uncertain. The story pauses here, unresolved, as the car moved through the bustling streets. Every mile brought Sadiq closer to confrontation, closer to a truth he had once faced and hoped to leave behind. Every eye watching the news, every whisper in the streets, and every heartbeat in that workshop waited for the revelation that could either destroy him or free him once more. The quiet of the private clinic was deceptive. Inside, Chief Ibrahim Bello stood at the window, gazing at the sprawling Lagos skyline, while Amina rested on the crisp white bed. Her skin was regaining color, and her breathing had stabilized, yet the shadow of her trauma still clung to the room like an invisible fog. Sadiq had been taken earlier by the authorities, leaving a void that felt heavier than the absence of his greasy overalls and steadfast presence. It was during this tense lull that Inspector Adebayo returned, her steps measured, her eyes sharper than ever. She had been reviewing every detail of Amina's ordeal, tracking leads and comparing statements, and now, something critical had surfaced. She called Chief Ibrahim and the small security team together, her tone serious. "What I've discovered cannot wait," she said, placing a thick file on the glass table. Chief Ibrahim's expression darkened. "Go on," he commanded. Inspector Adebayo opened the file carefully. Inside were records, witness statements, and a trail of transactions that had initially appeared unrelated. But as she spoke, a terrifying pattern emerged. The men who kidnapped Amina, they were not amateurs. They were professionals, and they are still at large. Evidence points to a network of individuals connected to powerful people who can operate in Lagos without fear of consequence. Amina stirred slightly on the bed, her weak eyes following every movement. Her lips trembled. They hurt me," she whispered. "I remember, shadows, voices, threats, but I don't know their names." Inspector Adebayo nodded gravely. "That is why Sadiq's role was more than heroic, it was essential. He saved you when these criminals failed to foresee a man of integrity interfering. But the danger is far from over. They believed you were useless. They left you behind when they thought they were safe. But now that you are alive and with your father, they may act again." Chief Ibrahim's hands clenched into fists. "They will pay," he growled, though his voice betrayed concern. "I cannot allow anyone to harm my daughter again." Inspector Adebayo shook her head. "It's not that simple. These are people with influence. They have the means to hide, manipulate, and strike at anyone in their way, including those who helped you." Her eyes settled on Amina, softening briefly. "And that includes Sadiq." Amina turned her gaze toward her father. "Sadiq, he saved me. He fed me every day when no one else would. He risked everything, even now, I fear for him." Chief Ibrahim's jaw tightened. He had already begun to realize that rescuing his daughter had placed Sadiq in a dangerous position. The man who had once been a struggling mechanic now stood at the center of a storm that extended far beyond the city streets. Inspector Adebayo continued, tracing the network on a digital map projected onto the clinic wall. These people operate in shadows. They use fear and wealth to manipulate outcomes. Their ultimate goal was to remove Amina from sight, but her survival threatens their secrecy. They will be watching every move of anyone connected to her, especially Sadiq. Chief Ibrahim's eyes flicked to the window, then back at the file. "We must act," he said, his voice steady but heavy with resolve. "We cannot wait for them to make the first move." Meanwhile, far from the clinic, Sadiq sat in a dimly lit interrogation room, his hands folded on the table. The recent resurfacing of his old arrest weighed heavily on him. But even in the face of suspicion and investigation, his thoughts were with Amina. He had saved her, fed her, and nurtured her back from the brink of death. He had seen her smile faintly for the first time, a glimpse of life that had seemed impossible only weeks ago. Unbeknownst to Sadiq, the people responsible for Amina's suffering were observing. From private offices and luxury cars parked discreetly in Lagos neighborhoods, shadowed figures monitored developments. They whispered in hushed tones about the man who had interfered with their plans, the poor mechanic who had somehow survived the city's dangers and now threatened to unravel carefully laid schemes. Inspector Adebayo returned to Sadiq's side at the police station, her voice firm but quiet. "Sadiq Adeyemi, you are not the criminal here. But there are real criminals still free, and they are powerful. They know about your actions, and they will not forget. You have to be cautious. Every step you take, every person you trust, it matters now more than ever." Sadiq nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. Lagos had tested him for years, but now the stakes were higher than poverty, hunger, or survival. This was a test of courage against enemies who thrived in darkness. Back at the clinic, Amina's eyes opened, brighter than before. "Father, they will come for him, won't they?" Chief Ibrahim moved closer, placing a hand over hers. "If they try, we will stop them. You are safe. But Sadiq, he is not just anyone. He saved you. And because of that, he is now part of this fight." The city outside continued its rhythm, unaware of the dangerous game unfolding in its streets. The truth of Amina's kidnapping, the real criminals behind it, and the power they wielded in Lagos remained hidden, like a storm gathering on the horizon, waiting to strike at the lives of those who dared oppose them. The chapter ends here, unresolved, as the shadows of the real enemies stretch across the city, leaving the fate of Sadiq and Amina hanging in suspense. The audience left wondering who will make the next move and whether the kindness that saved a life can withstand the forces now closing in. The Lagos skyline shimmered under the setting sun, a city of lights, noise, and endless motion. Yet inside the walls of Chief Ibrahim Bello's private residence, silence carried a weight heavier than any traffic jam or market cry outside. Amina had recovered physically, her cheeks flushed with life and her eyes holding a spark of hope, but the shadows of her past lingered. Sadiq sat quietly in the corner of the lavish living room, hands still rough from the work of his mechanic days, mind racing with everything that had happened. Chief Ibrahim paced slowly, the tension in his broad frame betraying the calm authority he usually carried. "We have faced threats before," he said softly, almost to himself, "but nothing like this. These criminals are clever, powerful, and hidden. We have saved Amina, yes, but can we protect everyone else?" Amina's voice, steady yet cautious, broke the quiet. "Sadiq, will they come for you again?" He met her gaze, eyes calm but serious. "If they do, I'll face them. I had to save you once, and I would do it again. But," he paused, looking at Chief Ibrahim, "the danger is bigger than any one of us. This is not over. Not by far." Outside, Lagos continued without pause, the city blissfully unaware of the invisible threads of danger weaving through its streets. Somewhere, hidden in the shadows, the people responsible for Amina's kidnapping were moving, plotting their next steps, watching, waiting. Sadiq and Chief Ibrahim knew that the past would not simply vanish, and that power, money, and influence could hide evil in the brightest parts of the city. Despite fear and uncertainty, bonds had been forged stronger than wealth or status. Amina's recovery, Sadiq's bravery, and the billionaire's love for his daughter created a fragile shield, but even the strongest shields can crack. Every day was a test, every choice a potential spark for chaos. Sadiq finally stood, walking over to Amina and Chief Ibrahim. "We've survived this long because we acted together," he said. "But the real question is, what comes next? Who can we trust in a city where secrets thrive, and power protects the guilty?" Amina reached for his hand, her grip firm, and Chief Ibrahim nodded, his expression a mixture of pride, fear, and determination. "We move forward," he said. "But carefully. The city doesn't forgive mistakes, and neither do those we've angered." The sun dipped fully below the horizon, and Lagos lit up like a sea of stars reflected in water. Yet beneath the glittering lights, uncertainty and danger lingered. The story of the girl rescued by a poor mechanic, the billionaire father, and the hidden criminals was far from over. And now, as the city holds its breath and the future of all involved hangs in the balance, we leave the story unresolved because life in Lagos, like the story of Sadiq and Amina, never truly ends quietly. So, dear viewers, here is the question for you. If you were in Sadiq's shoes, knowing the danger but wanting to protect the girl, what would you do next? Would you face the hidden enemies or disappear into the shadows? Your answer could change the story. What do you think happens next?